Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow. And on today's episode, we're talking the end of the Premier League season, wrapping up the top 5 race. How can Newcastle prepare for the Champions League next year? Why is Man City's third place finish a false dawn? And finally, did Tottenham have a better season than Arsenal? That's all on today's episode of the Transfer Flow. Okay, so we're back for our final Premier League roundup of the season. A long season it was, but to make it feel shorter, I've got Hayden Van Brewer here today. How are you doing, Hayden?
Yeah, doing really well. It felt like a long last month, end of the season, with Liverpool just parading around being champions. But there was still a lot that kind of happened in that European race, and I think there's a lot to talk about here to sort of wrap up the season and start to think about where teams kind of go from here.
Yeah, of course, we're already talking about transfers, but a bunch of these teams were waiting for the outcome of this top 5 race to figure out what their prospects were going to be for next season. And one of the teams who ended up missing out, Aston Villa, missed out on goal difference, went to Man United on the final day of the season, which honestly, like a month ago, you'd have said, even a couple of weeks ago, even after the Europa League final, you'd have said this should be an easy win for Villa. It was one of the worst performances in the clutch I can remember. I mean, obviously, Emi Martinez gets sent off at about halftime, and he does get sold down the river by Matty Cash with a terrible back pass. Though, how dangerous is it to allow Rasmus Højlund to have an open goal from 30 yards out? Like, not that dangerous. But by that point, Villa already, it was like 1xG to 0.04. They were playing really, really badly. And then there's the big controversy, which is the goal that was ruled out. So, Hayden, I want to ask your opinion on this. Like, Morgan Rogers goes through, the ball's rolling through to the keeper's hands. Rogers gets a little toe on it before Bayindir gets it under control. He then scores, but the referee's blown in the meantime. What do you think about this whole situation? Because now Villa fans are up in arms saying it's cost us 100 million, which I do get, but we'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah, I think there's a number of coaches and teams that sort of put things down to low variation game plan. We're sort of used to seeing this in knockout football where coaches will try to kill things. It feels like this is like the Jose Mourinho brainchild, right? Keep mistakes at a minimum. Hopefully we've got enough quality to take advantage and sort of make the game not about very much, and we're more prepared for that than you are, right? I think that's something Unai Emery sort of has a reputation of, guy that likes his team to sort of have a lot of control. It didn't feel like they had a lot of control in this.
No.
And then it feels like these big moments sort of just didn't shake out in their favor. And on a different day, maybe it would have. But if you make the game not about very much, and then your goalkeeper makes a mad decision, I think that can be that for you, right? If you leave it to that fine of margin, it can be that. And now those margins, obviously, for Villa, I would look back and say this was a really good season for Villa. Again, put themselves in and about the places for Champions League, had a very good European sort of run. But yeah, I think came down to just a few moments in those last games, or particularly in this game, and you just end up missing out by a very little bit.
Yeah, and I do feel for them on this decision in the game as well. Like, from their point of view, our game plan is let's nick a goal and then we'll sit back. And like, if that had gone in the 73rd minute, I think it was, could they have seen out another 20 minutes? Like, they were terrible in this game. I think they ended up with 4 shots, maybe. They gave up 25, but I don't know. Like, the referee blows his whistle before the goal goes in, so VAR come back and overturn it because the play has already technically stopped before Roger scores. Though the rules are really ambiguous on this. I think Michael Cayley pointed this out online, that the rules say a goalkeeper is considered to be in control of the ball with the hands when the ball is between the hands, or between the hand and any surface, like the ground or his own body, or by touching it with any part of the hands or arms, except if the ball rebounds from the goalkeeper or the goalkeeper has made a save. When you say like between the goalkeeper's hands, between and touching the goalkeeper's hands, because the ball is actually between Bayindir's hands, and this is a situation where you don't want any ambiguity at all. But yeah, from their point of view, like, that was exactly how they expected it to go, I guess. They were like, right, we'll go away, we'll shell, we'll get that goal, and then we'll hold on for the rest of the game. But it was interesting that this Villa team didn't really seem like they were going to be able to bunker. And actually, even in Europe this season, when we look at the PSG game, for example, they were at their best, and they were at their best defensively too, when they were really coming out and trying to take the game to them. It doesn't feel like this team has quite got the shut it all down, make everything miserable defensive gear that we're used to seeing from Emery teams in the past.
I think they missed Kamara for a lot of the season to sort of be able to do that. I think
Yeah.
when they are at their best defensively, it's because Kamara is really the guy that is shutting up stop, closing down spaces, and people are kind of connected to him. I think he's sort of that extra ingredient defensively for them. Otherwise, yeah, I think it's a group of dynamic attackers that maybe we wouldn't have expected from an Aston Villa team sort of 3 or 4 seasons ago. I think they've got a variety of guys that can do different things. Obviously, bringing in Asensio and Rashford added sort of a different dynamic. Rogers is a very athletic player who can carry the ball, is happy to be central or out wide. I think taking advantage of some of those traits is something that hopefully Villa look to do more and more of as they progress next year. Hopefully the offseason for Emery doesn't look like, hey, we just needed to be a bit more defensive and bunker in a little more. Hopefully it's, maybe we've got the tools here to play a little bit more aggressive and expansive. Again, at the same time, I think Bournemouth and Brighton were teams that sort of tried to do a bit of that. And again, finished below Villa in the table. So there's a bit here and there of getting that balance just right. And with Villa, I think in particular with Kamara, personnel does play a big factor there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And now they're in the Europa League. And look, obviously, it was great for them to be in the Champions League this season, but the Europa League, they have a genuinely good chance of winning it, not just because of Emery's track record in it, but this season, if they'd been in the Europa League at the quarterfinal stage, you'd have said they're the best team still in it. So maybe this is a silver lining in the cloud for them.
Yeah, no, I think they'll continue to be a strong team next year. This is a Villa team, I think, that is looking to keep building year on year. And if they can make some clever moves this summer, I think that progression will definitely continue. And we should expect to see Villa next year in this sort of challenging group towards the top end of the table. And again, I think we'd expect them to see them progressing through to the knockout rounds in European competition as well.
Mm-hmm. What about the other teams then that were competing for the top 5 place? Because obviously we ended up with City, Chelsea, and Newcastle making the cut. Newcastle losing at home to Everton, but making it anyway. Forest had the opportunity to get in there. They had this home game against Chelsea, ended up missing out after losing. A little bit, I guess you could say they're a little bit unlucky on the result. Expected goals pretty close, though Chelsea, after they scored, said, this game is going to suck. Do you see Forest slip out of the top 5 places as a victory for the stats guys who said they would eventually come undone, or do you think the story lies elsewhere?
Yeah, I actually find this is the game I would have paired with that Villa one, because I think Nottingham Forest also a team that tried to be defensive, make games be pretty close. I think they did that against this Chelsea team.
Yeah.
I think the reflection for Chelsea is how different they look when they don't have Nicholas Jackson really stretching the game and giving them that extra dynamic. It feels sometimes like with Jadon Sancho and a lot of their players end up getting very low. They can keep good possession, but they maybe lack that extra dynamic that throws them in behind and creates that extra space for Cole Palmer to be really dangerous. So I think that's sort of my note on Chelsea. With Nottingham Forest, again, they made it very close. Chris Wood got a few sort of close chances. He had the one at the end that just never really settles for him, right? He has the one that sort of goes off he has to take it on his shin. And he, I think, intentionally goes for it, and it just goes over the bar. So they got Chris Wood a few half looks in a game where they kept it close with Chelsea, a team with a very big budget. I think a team that you would have viewed Chelsea historically as a favorite, and however you want to call that, and made it very, very close and gave themselves a chance to, even on the final day, get themselves up into Champions League. So again, it's really hard. I have to say, like, for a team like Nottingham Forest, that's probably a really effective way. They played that well. I think they get Conference League, I believe.
Yes, they do. They do.
Coming in, which I think is going to feel bad given where they spent a lot of the season, but is probably a good progression for the group that probably needs to keep evolving. That probably, with the underlying number side of things, there's some worry that they're not generating enough offense, and they're going to need to keep that moving in that direction next year.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. I mean, like Villa have the talent, and also Emery has the talent to play two different ways. Like Emery he doesn't always balance attack and defense well, but he normally has a defensive game plan and let the horses run game plan. Forest just don't have that second ability right now, right? You know, I mean, in this game, after they go a goal down, they play another 44 minutes and they put up 0.9 XG. And more than half of that is that Chris Wood chance in the 93rd minute, which even if it had gone in, wouldn't have changed anything. Like they don't have the ability to pile on attack when they needed to. And actually on this topic, I have a little quiz for you. Forest won 19 league games this season. Very impressive. Do you know in how many of those wins they scored the first goal?
How many of the wins? 12 of them.
18. Wow. 18 out of 19. And that includes 6 of 7 when both teams scored. So there was only one game they went behind and then won, which was Villa at home. So it does feel like if you just jumbled up all these results, you know, and you didn't have this first half that's very strong and this second half that feels weaker, Forest fans would be just totally delighted because they wouldn't know what they'd lost by having had such a good start to the season. But at the same time, the second half of the season is a 56-point pace over a full year, which would have put them 9th or 10th. So my question is this. They ended up significantly better than their numbers, right? They were the only team above 13th with a negative expected goal difference. Next year, should we expect them to revert to that? Or do you think they might be worse than that, given that it does feel like results have fallen off and there's been a lot of talk about Nuno's kind of tactical, I guess like tactical golf bag being a little bit thin?
Yeah, I think there's some things that went really well for this team that it's sort of we're waiting to see how the market works out in the summer. I think we're not really expecting Chris Wood to maybe score the amount of goals that he did. Again, this is a player that's kind of getting into the middle of his 30s. So that's going to be a challenge there in terms of continuing to get a lot out of him. Probably need to supplement there. I think teams are aware of their threat in transition when they've got guys like Ilonga, Hudson-Odoi, Anderson, Gibbs-White, these guys with real effort and intensity in transition. I think teams are going to be a bit more wary of that. But some of the things I really like, I mean, I think Sells in goal had an unbelievable season. Looks to be both like a very good shot stopper and leader. And I think the center back pairing that they sort of got together is really strong. And if they can keep those center backs together, I think there's a few spots where they could kind of improve. And I think they'll look to do that in the summer. So I think a little bit in terms of like, where do you see this team sort of trending up or down is going to depend on, do some of these players get picked off in the summer versus are they able to just sort of add to it? That's a little bit my feeling. Like I do feel like they are a team that is, if they get one or two players right, I do think they actually could, you know, even if they have fewer points, have those underlying numbers continue to trend in a good way. Because I do like their ability in transition and their kind of comfort with defending deep, with how good Milenkovic and Murillo are at defending their box and how willing guys like Gibbs-White and Long are to run the other direction. It gives them a really good base to sort of add one or two tricks or add one or two players that can hopefully get them out of things. I think another player, Ola Aina, is a player that I really like. And I think if they can start to get, you know, a little bit more possession, that he's a guy that really does have a little bit more maybe passing ability and creativity higher up the field, not just as a runner, not just as a guy sitting back and defending. So I think they're, if I were to put it on right now, if they're able to keep most of the group together, I actually do like feel pretty positively about them and the way that they're going.
Yeah, and I think you know, except for Gibbs-White, there haven't been that many rumors about their players going. Like they're in quite a good position in the, obviously they've got some money, and also it feels like some of these players are very good for them, but maybe not good fits for super clubs. You know, so for example, Murillo, if a really big, if like Bayern Munich wanted him, then you'd have to sell him. But I don't think he's at that level. at least not yet. And so you get to keep that guy for another couple of years. It feels like there's quite a nice balance there. So I'd be intrigued to see them in the Conference League next season. And there they might actually have to come out at teams a little bit more. It might be interesting to see whether they can evolve a second strategy. The disappointment again is this Newcastle game. Newcastle really struggled. Final match, losing 1-0 at home to Everton, obviously bad, but they didn't create much. Shots were about even in this game. Isak is kind of half fit. Now they're linked with a move for Liam Delap. Is that where you'd focus in the summer if you were Newcastle, Hayden? Because if Isak goes down, they are in trouble. But they kind of need to build out the squad overall, it feels to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough because whoever they try to bring in that's not Isak, there's going to be a gap there. I mean, Isak is really excellent. I think ended up with more goals than Erling Haaland in the sort of boot race.
Yeah,
which is pretty impressive. Again, we'll see what he's able to do, but yeah, that's going to be a challenge underneath that. I think there are some kind of questions at the squad overall. They had some injury stuff. I think a number of these teams towards the top this year, that's sort of maybe one of the postmortems on this season is how teams dealt with injuries and where they wanted to sort of add depth and sort of manage that situation. I think having more Lewis Hall and Livramento sort of over the course of the year will help them a lot. And Newcastle benefited a lot from Murphy on the right wing, just having a really excellent season. A player that sort of had a late peak, but offers them sort of ability out wide to get the ball into the box, a technical player, a very hard worker on both sides of the ball. I think there's room for them to add a midfield. I don't hate them adding a striker. I think I'd kind of hope that player is sort of a younger one, maybe someone with a slightly different profile where if you needed to, you could play him alongside Isak at times or to add an extra player into the box. But I haven't really heard too many things about sort of the type of profile they're looking to add there. And it does sort of feel like the sort of 4-3-3 that they rolled out through a lot of the year with primarily Gordon, Murphy, Isak, something like that as a front three, that they're probably going to look to keep that same kind of shape, which means that the player that they're going to be bringing in is ultimately going to spend a lot of time on the bench or coming off the bench, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. But I am also a bit kind of back three curious with Newcastle because obviously they've done it in the past and you look at their talent and quite a lot of their talent there is quite suited to it. They've got interesting fullbacks for it. Even Murphy, I think, Murphy's played some wing back minutes in the past and I think would be an interesting candidate for it. Plus, the way they muddy things up, the fact that they've got Dan Burn at the back too, like it does feel like this is something that they could try. And if they were to go for someone like Liam Delap, who would be a pretty significant outlay for them, maybe we've talked before about how the right wing is such an expensive place to try and sign a player. Maybe it's sensible to consider trying to get an extra attacker in there in a different way without having to go and find that piece.
Yeah, no, I think you make a really good point here. I think they do have the tools, players like Lewis Hall and Livramento who are comfortable doing that, can flip up into those roles. A guy like Dan Burn that could play on the side of a back three. I think compared to a lot of squads, they actually have the suiting for that. The interesting thing that they don't really play out and out with is like with a creative kind of number 10 type. So I sort of wonder like if they did that, you sort of lose a place for maybe Harvey Barnes in the team, Anthony Gordon in the team. Yeah. Do they look more like a 3-5-2 with one attacking midfielder, but maybe that attacking midfielder is usually a winger, right? Is one of those guys coming inside. I wonder if that's something that they'll experiment a little with in the summer. I think Eddie Howe is a guy that will be willing to try something, even though I think that sort of 4-3-3 shape will still be the sort of bread and butter of what they do. 4-3-3, sometimes defending 4-4-2, a bit of variation in how they press on teams, continuing to play out of the back. But could they look to do it? I think they do have a lot of the versatility in the squad there to sort of make it happen. And guys like Bruno Guimaraes in particular, it feels like you can kind of, he's a kind of problem solver that will help everyone else figure it out. He can kind of plug the holes that you need him to, either building out of the back, creativity a bit farther forward, aggression in the midfield. He kind of can help cover as you move everyone else around. So no, I think that could be a really interesting shout if they do look to add that variation into their game.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see them back in the Champions League. They're a horrible prospect in the Champions League. The way that they muddy games up, I think they're often at their best in a game where they expect to have a little bit less of the ball. I mean, I know that everyone says that, but I suspect they'll keep Isak this summer. Maybe they'll be open to selling Gordon or Bruno, but Bruno might be a little bit old now to tempt the real super clubs at the price they've won. So they might just keep these guys, and it could be really interesting next year for Newcastle. I could see them doing very well in Europe, though I'm probably a bit more bullish in Europe than I am domestically with them.
I like them. I like them for the new sort of league stage of the Champions League,
Yeah.
having extra games at St. James Park. I think. I think Eddie Howe will have his team with a lot of energy and physicality in those games. And like the question I have is when they start to get to those knockout games where they're seeing teams twice and having to figure out some difficult opponents that are really geared up for those games, how that's going to play out. But yeah, I think it will be really fun to have them back in Champions League. I think there's still a lot to like about this group and this team. And compared to maybe some of the teams that we'll talk about in a second with Tottenham and Man United, it feels like they don't actually need to retool that much. With some of these other teams, it feels like to some extent you got guys that are maybe you're not stoked about but don't hate, but maybe you just sort of move guys in and out a little bit to try to get a different feeling or get a slightly different profile. Feels like Newcastle don't actually need to do that. They've recruited really clearly to an idea. They're athletic in the midfield. They have wingers that work hard both sides of the ball. And they try to get a lot of service into Isak's feet, not just by whipping balls into the box at head height, but trying to use, how good his foot skills are and his ability to just navigate tight spaces in and around the box. I think they've really got a clear game plan, and they're not going to like overly retool, if that makes sense. Whereas I think there's a number of teams that we're looking at as we start to shift down the table that are probably thinking, how can we roll the dice here a little bit and start to mix things up to really get us going again?
Well, who do you want to look at next? I mean, we can go to Tottenham. We can look at the relegated sides. I want to talk about Manchester City. Where would you like to go?
Yeah, I think let's start with Tottenham. I think Tottenham are sort of the team in this interesting moment where they've Champions League is sort of like their get out of jail free card in this very crazy season where they finished just above the relegation zone. And I think a little bit when you and Ted talked about this, a little bit with Kim in the newsletter, it was sort of talking about like, who can you sell? Who is going to stay and sort of be this core? And how is that team going to look? Now, obviously, the biggest question is sort of what is going to happen with Ange, because there's been a lot of signings that sort of make that happen. Now, Timo Werner is not going to still sort of be around. Guys like Brennan Johnson, I think we've sort of talked about as being direct, give you some of that hardworking and ability in transition. Well, what about when teams start to drop in on you because they know you're going to be attacking and vulnerable going the other way? Okay, how do you want to start to shift that? Again, maybe using Richarlison as a winger. He seems like kind of a guy that you could get money for, but also gives you the versatility to play in slightly different ways. He can play through the middle. He could play out wide. But I do wonder if, particularly in that midfield, if they might look to retool. It feels like to some extent that they've got a lot of guys in there that like to be sort of a bit more of an 8. And we've talked about that they're lacking that sort of profile that wants to help them just get on the ball and really set the tempo and dictate the play, and that they might move a guy like a Bentancur or maybe even Basuma to try to get a different profile in, make that part of the team start to look pretty different.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's where it feels like it has to go. They've got their young guys who are interesting. I don't know what Archie Gray is going to turn out to be, but as Ted said, we like Bergvall, Sarr, question mark, like hasn't really made good on the promise that we saw in France. But yeah, Basuma and Bentancur, these are guys you can move on. Like these guys, that they're not terrible by any means, but they're not really good enough, and their availability is also not incredible. So that's definitely what I think about. But do you have anybody else who you'd like to suggest for Spurs, given that Ted and I in the end were kind of throwing our hands up and we were like, well, I guess Ryan Cherky is what you do, because that's that's a kind of sensible gamble for them to take. But that's kind of where we are with Spurs. It's like, well, take a high upside gamble and maybe things go better.
Yeah, it's really difficult because we've talked on this pod before really about the challenges of like getting a guy out of Barcelona. I mean, Barcelona have a wealth of these midfielders that are able to help you get out of the back and play in tight spaces. You wonder if a guy like a Marc Casado, if they'd be willing to part with him just to meet
Sure.
PSR stuff, right? Like, it's hard because some of those players that you go like, well, could Spurs get a guy like that in there to really add something? Would that guy leave? Would that guy leave Catalunya? I'm not sure. I think that's sort of maybe a bit more of the question that I'm asking is, are there sort of a young, really technical player somewhere, possibly in a league more like Spain or Italy, that could come in and help you get a little bit of something different?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily have a nailed on fit or something that I'm like super excited about, or really goes like, that's the guy to get it going again.
Yeah, I think the main thing is they've just got to not be taken in by this trophy win. Like, don't get me wrong, celebrate the trophy win. It's great. And you don't have to sack Ange. You don't have to. But not sacking him just because you won the trophy is the thing that scares me. Because, as we were saying off air before they started, 22 losses in the Premier League this season. That equals their most ever in a single campaign. And the last time they had 22 losses was in the 42 game era. So this is their worst ever performance in a 38 game season. They finished 17th. They're 1 point above the relegation zones. I mean, like, not 1 point, one place above the relegation zone. Like, this is scary stuff for Spurs. And if that doesn't wake you up, I really don't know what will.
Yeah. Team with the fewest ties in the Premier League this season, Tottenham Hotspur. So they're gonna try to shift that game plan, and maybe the one thing to take away from that Europa League final is that there will be some strategic variation maybe coming into next year, where Spurs do pick and choose their moments to go all out kind of attack. But maybe one of the most interesting teams to sort of break down is this Manchester City team that in their disastrous collapse season end up finishing third. FB Ref has them joint third in XG difference.
Yep.
They brought in and sort of started to bleed in some new young players. Obviously, we have to wave goodbye to Kevin De Bruyne, probably the best midfielder in Premier League history. Just an absolute incredible player who I'll miss a lot watching in the Premier League. But yeah, this is a City team that I think is going to continue to show us some new faces and look kind of different. How do you sort of reflect back on this City season and start to think about where they're going?
I'm quite negative. I mean, look, obviously you're negative about City in the season where they didn't compete for the title. And they just about got into the 70s for their points. But I think, again, you could look at the end of the season where it's 7 wins, 3 draws in the last 10. And you can look at the money they're spending and look at the injury to Rodri and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, the fact that they ended up with the third best goal difference, the third best expected goal difference in third. And you could say, you know what, it'll be fine. Like, next season, Pep will work some stuff out. But what concerns me is that they never really worked that stuff out this season. When Rodri went down in the autumn, we were saying Pep will work something out and things will improve and we expect them to be good again. And that just didn't really happen. It didn't really happen. Even now, these last 10 games, they're pretty poor against Villa. They're pretty poor against Fulham. And some of those wins were against, like Leicester, for example. Plus, their transfer work is starting to scare me. So they missed out on Florian Wirtz this summer. He's going to go to Liverpool. They're linked to someone like Tiani Reinders, who to me is well below their level. And this is coming on the back of 2 seasons, I think, of subpar transfers. Now, that's not to say that some of these, that we're writing off Khusanov or Reis. It's also, there's Savinho in there. Savinho might be good. They got him at a knockdown price. That's absolutely fine. Gvardiol is great. Marmoush they overspent on, but he is a very good player. It's not to say it's all garbage or something, but it felt like in the past City would buy players and those players would elevate them. And now they buy players, and I say, is this guy is he even good enough for Man City? Like, Gonzalez has played quite a bit, but Gundogan still played quite a bit since January. Reis hasn't played. Khusanov got like 500 minutes and then was never seen again. And then those last couple of years, Kovacic, fine. That was a relatively cheap like bit of depth, okay, though it didn't actually do the thing that it was meant to do, the depth it was meant to give. Doku, reasonable gamble. But Mateus Nunes as well. And you just look at these transfers and I think, have City lost it? Like, I don't look at these transfers and think, yeah, this is a team that is flying back up to the top. I look at them now and think, okay, well, maybe their best front line next summer is Marmoush, Foden, Haaland. That's fine. But why should I believe that that'll be better next season than it is now? Because of Rodri. Okay, well, Rodri will improve it, but I don't think he can literally fix everything about this team. So I don't know. I'm a bit perplexed as to what's going on with them, especially because I think Arsenal are quite close to the finished article and look like they're going to go out this summer, spend big on midfielder, big on a left winger, big on a striker. Liverpool, we expected to enter a transition period, and they are going to have to transition, but they're going to get Florian Wirtz. They're going to have Wirtz and Salah on opposite wings. That pretty much covers a multitude of sins. So I kind of don't really know what City's situation is. And yes, Pep's staying a bit longer, but he's not staying forever. He's not there that much longer either. So I don't really know how primed for dynastic success City are going to be when Pep leaves in the way that we once expected them to be, in the way that we expected them to be even 18 months ago.
Yeah. I think the biggest point here is the solution for this group of players really didn't materialize. I don't think we feel more confident now than when they were on that sort of surprising losing run towards the start of the season, towards, kind of leading into the winter window and things like that. I think we really expected it to maybe start to get going towards the end of the season, having Marmoush settled in the team. Again, Savinho, very young player, Doku, these are guys that will have played in different team setups. And I think the feeling always was that there is a bit of a learning curve to the Pep Guardiola teams, that it takes a bit to get used to the new environment and how he wants you to play and the standards and that kind of thing. And I think there's still a feeling that the pieces haven't quite clicked in the way that they would want. And maybe there's still some reconfiguring. For me, the piece that I'm most curious in is that midfield. I'm really curious to see how much things look different with Rodri back in the team. I think that's sort of the media narrative, is that Rodri will come back and fix everything and he's the Ballon d'Or winner. I think our feeling generally is that there's maybe a bit more to that. Kovacic is coming into his 30s. Gundogan really playing a lot more minutes than you would hope for a player maybe of that age. Very intelligent player, but again, don't want to be relying on him to be your sort of scoring threat outside of Erling Haaland, who we know is still incredibly dangerous. I think a lot of this is the trickle-down effect of the transition to playing with Erling Haaland, that this is a player that does really force things to be a bit different. I think we saw sort of at the back, City did make that transition to playing with sometimes looking like 4 center backs, strong, physical, dominant back there, comfortable if they have to sit in a little bit more and absorb pressure so that they don't have to always stress Haaland and press super high up the field. At the same time, bringing in guys like Marmoush, Doku, Savinho does start to look like, okay, we do have some runners, maybe some pressing, but guys with some serious speed. How can we get the midfield right to sort of get the balance of numbers around the ball and getting that sort of interplay around the box, something that you sort of think of as hoping Foden can rediscover coming into this next year for City, while also still having that sort of midfield control. Nico Gonzalez, we'll sort of see. Is that a guy that can play alongside Rodri? Is he sort of the guy to take minutes off Rodri's hands? I think there's still a lot of questions here. One of the ones that I think I'm most sort of open book on with City is what happens with Rico Lewis. I think Khusanov coming in, I don't think we directly talked about this ourselves, but felt a little bit of a bit more maybe defensive stability, a lot of speed to sort of replace what Kyle Walker was, and a young player that could mold and adapt into a City player that maybe wouldn't be like a nailed on fit in a different system, in a back 4 or not really a fullback, but in a back 3 could pivot and do different things, that there might be some potential there. That sort of leaves me asking is Rico Lewis, could he come inside and be an actual midfielder? He's a guy that spent a lot of time inverting in possession? Could he come in and add a different dimension? I think he's looked good at times when he does that. I want to see where the solution comes for the City team, because it feels like they're both not a million miles away. The underlying numbers ended up in a place that was, I think, really good considering how it felt like they were going at parts in the season. But yeah, it does feel like there's still need a tinker or two, a little bit of a movement or a different idea to really get the most of this group coming into next season.
Yeah, and I mean Rodri's 29 next month. So even if Rodri comes back and even if he does come back and does fix everything, he's not going to fix it indefinitely. He's not going to fix it for the next, several seasons. I just think with City, the attack is still better than most teams in the league. I think it was just second by expected goals this year, but way off Liverpool and very close to teams like Bournemouth. And the defense is like seventh by expected goals against, and it's actually not far for it to get up to third. But it's like a 10 expected goal difference to Liverpool and 15 to Arsenal. I don't think Rodri makes that difference. Like, that is an enormous change for him to make. So it just feels like they need to make a huge improvement next season, while also saying goodbye to De Bruyne, while also probably finally giving up on people like Stones, who they've been able to historically get at least some play out of, and in their best seasons get quite a lot out of. So I don't know. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see this entire turnover, but it does seem like Pep's final years at the club are not going to be spent really building to win necessarily, unless they do something bananas this summer. They're going to be spent figuring out the blueprint for what comes next.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's where City is, and in contrast to Arsenal, I think this is a off season where, yeah, City's got some restructuring to do, whereas Arsenal didn't have a player that had double-digit goals in the Premier League this season. It maybe feels a bit more clear of, well, if we just add a center forward here, a guy on the end of some of this, and maybe try to play a little more front foot, maybe in the midfield, that just actually gets us there, and the rest of the group is kind of where we want it to be. No, I think that's right.
Okay, well, where else do you want to go? We were talking a little bit about relegation before we got on the air. We've got a little bit of time left here. Relegation, the 3 promoted teams go straight back down for the second season running. And what's interesting as well is there's quite a big gap, right? Last season, I think it was 10 points. This season, 13 points. And last season, actually, if you look at the underlying numbers, the best of the relegated teams was not that far away from the worst of the teams that stayed up. I think Wolves had the worst underlying numbers of the teams that stayed up, and they had like a minus 22 expected goal difference compared to minus 29 for the best of the relegated sides. This year, the difference is 23 in expected goals between West Ham and Ipswich, I think. So are we expecting this to widen again? Are we expecting? Are we finding that the Premier League is just cutting loose of the English football pyramid, or do you think it's about the teams that got promoted this year?
Yeah, I kind of want to say the former. I think my feeling is like West Ham and these teams right above, West Ham, Wolves. These are teams that currently until maybe the Cunha one happens, or is a done deal, have Brazilian national team players on them. The teams just above relegation in the Premier League. Like, that's a huge jump when you're trying to picture these championship teams coming up with guys that, let's just say, a number of English players that are nowhere near the English national team, making that jump up to playing, historically, again, Brazil being one of the top nations, Brazilian national team players just above the relegation zone, sort of season over season. It's a big jump up. And again, West Ham are a team that were winning European competition in very recent memory. I think it's a really big challenge. We'll see what the promoted teams, the Sunderland team coming up that came up through the playoffs was the youngest team in the championship. So I think there's some questions there on maybe they look a bit more like, the Ipswich team that came up, where some good, interesting young players, but maybe just not enough real engine to compete against the Premier League teams. Burnley had this crazy defensive season. James Trafford was really, really excellent all year. He's now looks to be sort of in the England setup with Tuchel. I wonder if there's going to be some bids for him again, an English player, a goalkeeper who had a really fantastic season. If he doesn't go, there's definitely going to be rumors about him if he does start the season with Burnley come the middle of the year, I would imagine. Given what he has, I think the biggest, and obviously Leeds were the team that won in the end and won the title, so you'd sort of start to think about them as the team that has the most potential coming up. I think there's a lot of questions to sort of ask about what they do with recruitment, that the Premier League, the way Leeds played a really open attacking style, again, very good defensively, but against the type of opposition they'll face in the Premier League, where can they sort of end up and shake things out? I think they're sort of the best bet coming up, but still it feels like there's a lot of work that they're going to have to do, and you have to be sort of both very good and very lucky to buck the trend right now, because again, the team's right above the relegation zone. A team like West Ham being in European competition, Crystal Palace kicking around the bottom half with the FA Cup title, going to be in European competition. Manchester United and Tottenham Hotspur are the teams right above there, right? Like, that's who you're competing against. It's a massive, massive challenge. And I don't know. I think I would ask sort of proactively, like, if this happens a third time, do we think the FA and the Premier League will step in to try to do something to change this at some point? Because it's not something that I'm used to in my sort of lifetime of watching the Premier League, but it does seem to be a trend that might be difficult to kick.
Sure. I mean, I guess the question will be whether any of these teams that get relegated can use the money over a period of time to get themselves a bit closer to the Premier League. Like, we have seen that in the past, right? That teams would come up, get relegated, come up, get relegated, and gradually were able to build a little bit more, make themselves a bit more stable. But yeah, I agree. We've had so many questions this year where people have said the promoted teams are going straight back down. What is the plan? Like, how do you if you had to construct a plan to stay up in the Premier League, how would you do it? And I think, I don't even know if it's possible. Like, you've kind of got to get lucky. You've got to have a really good coach, and you probably need a couple of your players to go up into the Premier League and just explode, so they don't get picked off by bigger teams. Like that feels like it's the only way to go right now, or to understand that it might be a 10-year process of yo-yoing, and then maybe you get to be a Brentford. Then maybe you get to be a Brighton. I don't know, but it's a bit concerning for the Championship right now.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and also just with the market of coaches. I mean, if you're able to succeed and bring your team out of the Championship, the interest there is really high. I think, like, you're either going, if you're doing something really exciting, we saw with Vincent Kompany, you could get the Bayern Munich job, or the interest is not very high, and the feeling is you were able to get your team up from the Championship, but then you're going to be in trouble when you start swimming with the sharks, so to speak. So something to keep an eye on. I also think the inverse is really interesting, that the teams going back down, I think generally we expect them to at least be in the playoffs, sort of just on the strength of what they have coming back down. Although we did see Luton with the double relegation this year, which is again, I think the trend going the other way is maybe less concrete, whereas right now it does feel like the gap for those promoted teams to come in and make an immediate impact. It feels like we're a lifetime ago that Chris Wilder got that Sheffield United team into mid-table with the overlapping center backs and all that. It feels like that's sort of like a lifetime away from where we're at now with these teams just going back down.
Yeah, agreed. But we're already getting into next season, and we've just finished this one. So maybe we'll end it there for today. We will be back later in the week with the Champions League final preview. We'll also be back next week to talk Champions League final after the game has been played. That'll be you and me again, I think, Hayden. Where can people find you between now and then?
Yeah, I'm H. Van Brewer on Blue Sky. Again, talking footy, same kind of stuff I'm doing here.
Great. And thank you very much for listening or watching. Please do subscribe if you haven't subscribed. We are going to be dropping some more rebuilds very, very soon. I think we've got Chelsea up next. So honestly, that one's going to be hardcore. But we're going to be bringing them to you all through the summer, both written ones and as podcasts. So make sure that you're paying attention now, because the summer's shaping up to be an extremely exciting one. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.